Good evening, everyone. Uh, if I'm not mistaken, this is our 20th presentation since we started this program. And today we are moving into further into the largest season of the church that encompasses most of the year, and the season of weeks after Pentecost. So, as we most of us know, that there are two major cycles in the life of the church. One is the Paschal cycle that begins with the weeks in preparation to Great Lent, then Great Lent, Holy Week, Pascha, uh, season after Pascha, then Ascension, Pentecost, and then the Sundays after Pentecost are starting from there. So we are in the second week after Pentecost, and this week we visit. We actually have time only to visit two kind of a major areas. One is, and we begin with the feast of Nativity of St. John the Baptist, that just happens to fall within that week this year because it is celebrated on June 24th every year. So, and then we will deal with the theme of the next Sunday that from the beginning of the 20th century became the celebration of the local, or rather the saints of the local autocephalous church. So last Sunday was the celebration of all the saints, and this week this coming Sunday will be dedicated to the particular saints of our land. And of course, the Russians will celebrate all the saints of Russia. And also, although this originated in 1918 in Russia after the revolution, it seems that quite a great number of other autocephalous churches kind of began to follow suit and celebrate their local saints on Sunday after the Sunday of All Saints. So, looking at these two icons depicting Nativity of St. John the Baptist, we see a very typical composition, and this is something that we need to keep in mind, that the composition that depict the mother, then the child. Often the mother was accompanied by a midwife, and the child is being washed after the birth, signifying that that child is human and the birth was natural. And also in that composition you would often see the figure of the father kind of in a different space somewhat. Like in this icon, it's rather late, I think probably 16th, 17th century Russian icon. On the right, you see the mother of John the Baptist, Elizabeth, lying in her bed, assisted by a midwife, a couple of them actually. And so another midwife is washing the infant. You see Zacharias, his father, and of course we know the story of how the birth of Saint John the Baptist was announced to him by the angel, and he didn't believe these tidings, and he could not speak afterwards. So he is writing on a tablet, writing his name, and his name was indicated to be John. Now, interesting how in this icon you have it's a composition of the two, in fact, nativity and the icon of Saint John the Baptist himself. At that time, especially in Russian iconography, there was a prevailing fashion to depict St. John the Baptist with wings, not so much indicating his specifically kind of angelic nature, but that's in fact is not what the wings are for. Iconographic symbol of the wings means that the person has been sent. He's a messenger, and Saint John the Baptist, without any doubt, is a messenger sent by God to prepare the path of the Savior whom he preceded. So, although of course it is a superficial symbol, as far as angels are concerned, because even the name angel, the word itself, means the one who had been sent, means the messenger. So it seems to be a little more appropriate. So. But to depict St. John the Baptist with wings seems to be a little bit of a stretch, so that very often you see that composition becoming more in fashion in the later centuries. So interesting how the iconographer dealt with the notion of two different spaces: the space of the birth, which of course was sort of off limits to men. It was the fulfillment of the vocation of a woman in childbearing. Now, and how he indicated that there's two areas in the icon, one with a red background, and of course matching the red cover of the mother who just gave birth, and the other kind of a more greenish tones. There is another tower on the left, diagonally opposite to the background of the figure of Zacharias seated over against it. So kind of creating two different spaces, two different areas within this complex topography of this icon. So now this week, we're going to be spending mostly by looking at the saints. And there is a notion that, of course, the saints are given to us according to the plan of God. And of course, as our Lord himself indicated, that St. John the Baptist was the greatest of the prophets. In a sense, the one of the greatest saints. No accident that he is always depicted in the very fundamental iconographic composition that is called Dioceses, on the opposite side of the Mother of God. So now, so I just wanted to say a couple of things about this notion of the plan that God has for us. Many people think that God is manipulating all kinds of things, manipulating nature, manipulating history, manipulating people's lives, and all those things. It seems to me that approach, the approach is rather dangerous, rather misleading. Now, the opposite view would be that God is not involved in any way. Things are going the way they are without him being there at all, and without him having any input. If he does not have a plan and manipulates, then he has absolutely no other input, which of course is just as erroneous and just as dangerous, maybe even more so. But the truth, it seems to me, is that our Lord is present, but not manipulative. He is not pulling strings, but rather expressing his presence as the meaning and the impact of that presence is always the same. It is the presence of all abiding, long suffering, self emptying love. So, and he's present as a life giver. But what happens in reality is, of course, a mixture, is in a sense something that God had intended all along, that this world will be a cooperation of His creativity and ours. So, and although our contribution to that cooperative effort is very often to create nothing, or rather to create death, nevertheless, it still stands. Nevertheless, where we are participating in it. And the events that happen depend on this incredibly vast complexity of relationships, and how and freedoms and choices. So, St. John the Baptist, who was promised, whose presence was in fact prophesied in the Old Testament, his parents were, as it were, handpicked by God, but rather handpicked not because He chose them specifically over against anybody else, but rather they responded to Him in their own unique way that created the possibility of this wonderful life. So the question might be raised: why do we celebrate those nativities? I mean, of course, St. John the Baptist is an important figure, and he indeed prepared the ways of the Lord, made his strength path straight and whatnot. He was the voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the ways of the Lord. But why we should celebrate his nativity? Why it is an important event for us as well? Because it seems to me, or at least one way to look at it, is that we are invited to participate in it. We are invited to share in it. We are invited to rejoice with his aged parents. We are invited to somehow be there with them in that love, in that relationship with the child who grew up to be the greatest of all the prophets. And so also with every single one of us. God does not look at us with the intention of judging us by the way how we can add to his plan, or how he can use us for something. He's rejoicing in us. He's rejoicing in this adding and creating, offering that creativity to us as well. So it is all about love, and one of the most important, the beginning of love, for the most part, although it's a culmination of the whole process, but is the birth of a child. It's a birth of the new life, the life that leads to the kingdom of God, that life that manifests the presence of God himself. So, but at any rate, this is just kind of a little we might actually come back to this idea after we look at our own local American saints later on. But of course, the American saints are well, we know a few that are very, very popular, and there are few who are remembered sometimes, and there are few that are almost unknown yet. But the number of the saints who have been glorified already, and of course there are many others who receive the local veneration in some areas, such as Matushka Olga in Alaska, and probably will be recognized or glorified by the whole church. The number of saints who have tilled this spiritual land of America comes to a number 17. as of today. So let us look at this image that represents at least few of them, kind of superimposed on the map of the North America. Oh, next one. So now, on the left, you see the list, and I'm not going to read them now, but I'm going to read each the name of each and every one, and looking at whatever material we have for them. But you can see that they spread throughout this country. They are really not only gifts for us, but also a fruit of the labor, fruit of the life of the church on this continent that is present for over 200 years. So there's a number of icons of all saints. Of course, we've seen them last Sunday and the last presentation, but there's also a number of icons of all American saints that are in existence. And this one was commissioned some time ago for me, and so they're not 17, but most well-known saints surrounding the throne of the Mother of God. It's interesting that there are places that claim to be the domain of the Mother of God. For example, Mount Athos is her property or her domain, and it has been used as a metaphor, of course, in the poetic form of the specific relationship that the monks of Mount Athos have with the Mother of God. But in a sense, every land, every autocephalous church is a facet of, or a particularly unique person or presence within this, the Mother of God, as a symbol, as an all-enclosing presence of the church herself. So it's very appropriate to have the local American saints surrounding her and representing this fullness of sanctity, fullness of these witnesses of the presence of Christ. And here in this icon, it is the presence of Christ Emmanuel in the lap of his mother. So now let's go and visit and look at and learn a little bit about each of our own American saints. And we begin with Saint Alexander Chotovitsky, who is one of the very well-known saints. You can see that there is his photograph as a young man, as a missionary here in the United States, and you also see his icon that was made after his glorification. Now, some of American saints were missionaries. Some of them were hierarchs. Some of them worked in the vineyard of the American church, but were glorified because of their martyrdom. And so we will visit each, look at each case. And Father Alexander Chotovitsky is, of course, a Hiram martyr, because after his long stay in the United States, and he came here in 1890 as a lay missionary, and was ordained to the priesthood here in the United States. He was active as a missionary among the Uniates, especially in here in Northeast, and he stayed here until 1914, where he was asked to return to Russia. And in Russia, he worked for the church, and in fact, he was assigned to Christ the Savior Cathedral in Moscow in 1917. So, and he shared the the fate or the road to martyrdom and glory shared with so many new martyrs of Russia that who are many hundreds of thousands of them. So, but for us, he is really important because he, of course, the Orthodox Church in America claims him as one of our own. So, after the revolution in 1917, he was subjected to cruelties. Um, because he defended the Orthodox faith and he defended the church properties that were desecrated and destroyed. He suffered through many arrests and exile, um, and there is no documentation of his death, but there are oral reports that he, although for a number of years he was in and out of prison, that he was finally arrested in the summer of 1937, the most horrible year of the Stalin murders, and he was shot on August 19. So again, he showed this one trait that could be easily seen in so many of the other ones: a steadfast faith and total commitment to the life of the church. In fact, especially amongst the Russian clergy, there were many who were forced to leave the church. There were many who were forced to renunciate the church and even God in public hearings and in the public eye for the purpose of anti-religious propaganda. There are so many who were killed. There are so many who so the persecution was so strong, and people responded to that persecution in different ways. Some of them went into hiding and so on. But there was so much perseverance, there is so much courage, there is so much steadfast love for the church and Christ shown among these martyrs that is really very amazing. The next saint that we remember is Father Alexis Toth of Wilkes-Barre. Again, you see before you his the photograph with his crosses and awards. Each cross and medal indicated a specific award for his good service. He was mitred archpriest, so you can see even the mitre on a little table next to his chair. And this is an icon that I painted some time ago to house a little bit of his relics right in within that cross that he's wearing. Now, we know quite a lot about Saint Alexis because he was a priest in the Uniate Church in Slovakia. The Orthodox Church in Ukraine and outlying regions in Slovakia has been subject to persecution by the Roman Catholics for centuries. And one of the ways in which they because they were occupied by predominantly Catholic Poland. And one of the ways in which the Catholic authorities wanted to introduce and force the Orthodox to convert to Catholicism was a creation of so-called unia, in which the people of these regions were allowed to have Orthodox services. And they were even allowed to have married clergy. But they were supposed to commemorate the Pope and accept the hierarchs that were Roman Catholics over them. So, and that happened, so the large areas in Western Ukraine and in Slovakia, the Orthodox became known as uniates. Now, Saint Alexis was a married priest who was sent to serve the Uniate parishes in the United States. He was a widower, and now, when he came here and approached the Roman Catholic bishop, bishop humiliated him and denounced him for being married, and was in fact expressed the notion that was held by Roman Catholic Church here for a while, that all those Slavic immigrants who were part of the Uniate Church supposed to revert immediately to Roman Catholicism, and that was it. Now, it was really quite horrible for Saint Alexis, and not only for him, but for thousands of people who were essentially Orthodox, whose connection to Roman Catholic Church was very tedious at best. So he led a great number, tens of thousands of Uniate parishes back to Orthodoxy, and worked tirelessly to that end. And in fact, most of the parishes, a large number of the parishes of the Russian mission in United States was from the Uniate origin. And Saint Alexis, with his travels, with his personality, with his charisma, and his love for orthodoxy, had made it possible. So, so he is glorified as the missionary. He died in 1909 and was buried at St. Tikhon Seminary. And in 1994 he was glorified as Saint Alexis of Wilkes-Barre. Now, the next slide that we will look at would be a photograph of Saint Alexis and some other missionary priests in St. Tikhon Seminary. So he is second to the left front row. To the far left back row is Saint Alexis, and seated almost in front of him is Saint Alexander. So on the right we see the photograph of the reliquary of Saint Alexis in St. Tikhon Seminary in Canaan, and below that is the under the canopy there is his icon with a part of the relic that is there for veneration. So next saint is actually the one whom I found out about just recently, within the last few years, and because I was I was commissioned to paint his icon. And this is Saint Vasily Martits. Uh, Saint Vasily Martys was an archpriest from Poland, and he came here as a missionary. Of course, he was a part of the Orthodox Russian Orthodox Church, uh, and that area of Poland, or rather Belarusia, was a part of the Russian Empire. And he uh, was here in America, in United States. He was in a missionary priest in Alaska. He had a parish that included the Spruce and Woody Islands near Kodiak. So he built a Church of the Nativity in Afognak, in Alaska. And then after his stay in Alaska for about 6 years, he asked to be transferred to the lower states, namely to Osceola Mills in Pennsylvania, because the harshness of Alaska's climate, and also he was there with his daughters, and he was concerned with their education. So they Father Vasily and Matushka Olga with their daughters were in Pennsylvania, and then after which he served in Old Forge, Pennsylvania, and then went to Edmonton after serving in Vostok, Canada as well. So after this prolonged stay in United States since 1900, so for 12 years until 1912, Father Vasily and his family returned to Poland. And so he shared this very, very difficult and bloody history of Poland after this time. So he so he was assigned during the Second World War. He was assigned as a pastor or a chaplain of the Polish military. But at the very end, he almost survived the war, but at the very end, in 1945, him and his family were assaulted by the brigands, and he was killed. He was glorified in March of 2003. And his relics are placed in Church of Saint John Climacus in Warsaw. So, and he's considered to be a patron saint of Orthodox Christians in the Polish army because of his work as a chaplain. So, a very, very interesting saint. Of course, we claim him as our own, share him with Poland. Polish Orthodox Church, because of that 12 years that he served here in the United States in different places. Now, the next icon, in the next saint that is included in the number 17th, we have to go all the way back to the early centuries, because Saint Brendan the Navigator was believed to be able to establish, together with some of his friends in his voyage from all the way from British Isles to Canada, and so it was way before anybody else. now, of course, there is no documentation or any archaeological um, support to this notion. We can dismiss that, like many people say, you know, the Russians believe that it was Andrew the Apostle who visited Kiev way centuries before it became even a little village, and blessed this and kind of expressed this prophecy that on this spot there will be a great Christian nation. So we can say that Brendan the Navigator performed the same role for the Orthodox in North America. Although, since there was no way to disclaim that either, those people who criticized this notion would say that they didn't have ships that can go that far. Until in 1976, an Irish explorer by the name of Tom Severin built an ox leather ship and sailed that ship all the way to Canada, and thus proving that it was possible to do. Whether it happened or not, historically it might be questionable, but it is really important to realize, to accept that as a part of reality of who we are in North America. In fact, both Canada and the United States, of course, are nations built by these voyagers from different places, from different times. The very identity of these nations themselves, and more specifically the Orthodox among them, somehow could be included in that group of voyagers that have crossed the sea to be in this land at a certain time in history. So we can say, we can claim with some certainty Brendan the Navigator as the forebearer, or the one who truly started the Christian Orthodox presence in this continent. Now, next one is, of course, the one whom we know best, and we know more about, and the one who is truly the protector of Orthodox in North America, and that is Saint Blessed Herman of Alaska. Well known, and truly Saint Herman's presence spreads far and wide from the Spruce Island where he lived. And no longer we can say that his missionary effort was limited to the Aleut people whom he encountered there, and whom he defended and taught and converted and loved, but also to all of us. He became, in a sense, a patron, truly a patron saint of Orthodox in our land. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about him, but because we all know him. But just the dates. So he was born probably around 1756, and passed away in the Lord in 1837. He became the first saint glorified by the Orthodox Church in America after receiving the Thomas of Autocephaly from the Mother Church, the Russian Orthodox Church. So, in a sense, his presence, I've never had a chance to go to Alaska, but every pilgrim who ever went to this land testified how his living presence is tangible in that land. How still his memory and his presence, he's lovingly called Apami, which means grandfather. So he's their saintly grandfather. And in a sense, as I said, it is also true about all of us. Uh, the next one that we're going to look at is Saint Innocent, the enlightener of the Aleutians, an apostle to America. Oh, by the way, this is just a painting by Father Luke Dingman of the so-called St. Herman's Trail. I was told by pilgrims that they have to, from the beach head, they have to go up to where the little skeet where St. Herman's lived, up that little trail through this green, in a sense, lush evergreen forest. But the next saint is Saint Innocent of Alaska, missionary bishop. Um, uh, he was born in 1797 and died in 1879. So he was an absolutely extraordinary person with an extensive, very deep and profound education, no number of languages. So when he started working on the American mission, the first thing he did was to, in fact, create a written language and translate into it the services and the scripture for the Aleuts. So he even devised an alphabet, Cyrillic letters, for the Unagan dialect of Aleut language, and translated the Holy Gospel of St. Matthew into it, and other church materials as well. So he traveled extensively, of course, by using dogs, using kayaks, using every possible kind of transportation available at that time. So he lobbied for the expansion of the Orthodox mission in America with the Russian government. Actually, because of him, that mission received a tremendous amount of money. In fact, before the Russian Revolution in 1917, the Russian Orthodox mission in America had a budget of something like 2 million golden rubles, which was an incredible amount of money at that time. So he instilled this notion of importance, that this is the new continent. These are the people that are truly represent these fields that are ready for harvest. So he, in a sense, sometimes single-handedly was able to bear and carry this growing Orthodox mission on his shoulders. So he died in 1879 and is buried in Troitse Sergievskaya Lavra, which is the patriarchal residence in Russia. So he was glorified by the Russian Orthodox Church at the request of the Orthodox Church in America in 1977. So now the next saint is Saint Jacob Nietsvetov. Saint Jacob Nietsvetov is interesting for us in many ways. First of all, because he was an Aleut himself, although I think that his father was a Russian from Tobolsk, from Siberia, and his mother was an Aleut from Atka Island. So, and he was the eldest of the 4 children, and he um, became a priest after he was married, and in 1822, and was assigned to at first to the Holy Trinity Church in Irkutsk, and uh, so and then he after his ordination to priesthood, he petitioned to become a missionary and to go and work with the Aleut people, and it happened, and he worked tirelessly in specifically not only amongst the people whom he knew and whose language he spoke, and he was a builder of the churches, and the photograph is one of the church, St. Nicholas Church, that he built. They're really interesting that there's interesting statistics for us. So by the end of 1829, 6 months after arriving at Atka, Father Jacob had recorded 16 baptisms, 442 chrismations, 53 marriages, and 8 funerals in 6 months. Just think of it. This is just really amazing. So he passed away in 1864. He was only 60 years old. All right. The next saint on our list is Saint John Kachurov of Chicago. Now, Saint John is one of the new martyrs, a hieromartyr of the Russian Church. In fact, it's really interesting how he again carries out and brings out that very same spirit of standfastness. So he was born in 1871, a son of a priest. In 1895, he married and was ordained a deacon, and was ordained a priest in August 1895. He was ordained specifically to work for the diocese of the Aleutians in Alaska. So he became the first permanent priest, although not in Alaska, but in St. Vladimir's Church in Chicago. And that parish later became the Holy Trinity Cathedral. He devoted much effort aiding the establishment of other parishes also in Chicago area, the parish of Archangel Michael in southwest Chicago, and many others. Also, he was working together with Father Alexis Toth, Saint Alexis of Wilkesboro, in bringing in and establishing the parishes, Orthodox parishes in that area, and also a so-called Orthodox Mutual Aid Society that provided support for the newly arrived immigrants, that were the number of which was increasing. So now he returned to Russia in 1907. In 1917, he was transferred to St. Catherine's Cathedral in Tsarskoye Selo, just outside of St. Petersburg. And he became a very popular priest, having possessed this wonderful charism. And so he, in 1917, right in the middle of Bolshevik Revolution, he was arrested by a screaming, angry mob, when he was trying to defend the churches from being desecrated, um, and he was arrested and immediately shot immediately after his arrest. So his martyrdom was very, very clear. I've read also someplace that he was the first Orthodox priest who was shot by the Bolsheviks immediately or right during the revolution. So it seems to be symbolic that he's the one who served and dedicated his priestly life for so many years to the missionary effort in America, and he would lead. He would be in the first row of the new martyrs in Russia as well. Now, the next saint that we remember is Saint John Maximovich, Archbishop of Shanghai and San Francisco. Um, the presence of Saint John right now is probably felt more and more and became widespread. Saint John, who was born in 1896, in all his years in different areas of his missionary work, first in Shanghai in China, then in United States, then in Europe, in France, and Germany, Belgium, and then coming back to United States. He brought with, and his work was very unique, in fact. He was a very strange man to look at. He was very small, he was hunched over, his face was kind of a not beautiful, and he spoke with difficulty, and yet he radiated such love, he radiated such wonderful enlightening presence that wherever he went, he was much loved and revered. There should be a book written about all him and anecdotes from his life. He was extraordinary in his monasticism as well. He was not only a true monk, but which is not the case with all the bishops. So sometimes their monasticism is rather not very deep. But contrary to that, he was a true monk. In fact, he was an adherent to a monastic tradition of those who never sleep. His Podvig, his spiritual struggle, in fact, was kind of stemmed around that fact that he would not sleep in a bed. He never owned a bed, so he would sleep for a little bit in the chair, but through the night he prayed, and if he would stay in one place for any length of time, he would have a rope with knots on it, a thick rope suspended from the ceiling, and he would stand in prayer, kind of holding on to that rope to keep himself upright during his prayer. Which of course meant that most of the day he was kind of dozing off a little bit, but every visitor, everyone whom I had a chance to question about that, would say that he nevertheless, in spite of the fact that he appeared kind of dozing off, he was there fully and engaged and listened and will never miss a word when spoken to. So another little snippet that not very many people know is that when he had to leave Manchuria or China after the communist takeover, he worked tirelessly to bring out as many Russian children that were stranded there, and in fact, he forced the State Department and Congress to act actively to help to bring those children out of communist China. He would just simply stake out on the steps of Congress, all garbed like you see him on the photograph in his bishop's cassock and monastic klobuk, and he would stay there day in and day out. He would come in the morning and would stay through the whole day until he was allowed to have an appointment with appropriate officials. Also, he was a little bit a fool for Christ. After his life in China, he loved wearing sandals, a kind of Chinese little sandals, and very often would walk around in these sandals that were almost bare feet. And of course, he would serve the same way. So one of the bishops of the Russian Church abroad, of course, to the church whom he belonged to, reprimanded him and said, "Well, I want you to wear shoes when you come to church." So the next morning, before the liturgy, he came in bare feet, but his shoes were tied around his neck. And when the bishop asked him, "What are you doing, you clown?" he said, "Well, you told me to wear the shoes. I'm wearing them." So, and there are many, many other stories like that. Of course, after his glorification, his relics are told to be miraculous, and his intercession for many people, especially healing illnesses. Our own Father Paul Berchtold attributes his miraculous healing of cancer to the intercession of St. John Maximovich. Now, he this is we can see the photographs of his glorification and his reliquaries being carried, and there he is in the cathedral of the Mother of God, the Joy of all who sorrow, in San Francisco, as he is to this day. All right. Now, then we go back to the member of the group of original missionaries that came to Alaska with St. Herman, St. Juvenali of Alaska, who we know that St. Herman was never ordained. He was a lay monk, a simple lay monk. But there was a priest in the group of missionaries, St. Juvenali, and he was the first martyr, the proto-martyr, because during his missionary work he truly gave his life to save the lives of Alaskan children who were supposed to be killed during this very complex, warring, feuding, tribal violence. So, and the next slide will show the a little iconographic image of his martyrdom. He blessed the tribesmen who came to kill him. He did not utter a word. So truly presenting them with the an image of the suffering of Christ himself. So, all right. Going down the list, our next saint is Saint Nikolai of Zhitcha. Again, you see his photograph when he was at St. Tikhon's Seminary, and also his icon. He was again extraordinary person with extraordinary life. He is an author of many books. He was a poet, and these beautiful prayers that he wrote resonate and are used by many people to even today in English translation. He was a Serbian is very well known in Serbia. In fact, he's not only glorified by the Serbian Orthodox Church, but he is considered to be a national hero. Uh, he was during the Second World War. He became a leading enemy of the Nazi occupational force for his tireless support of humanitarian effort to help people who were persecuted and killed by the war. So here is another photograph of him. He has extraordinary face, very very expressive. And the photograph next to him is during the war when he was arrested by the Gestapo. So he's photographed next to a German soldier. So he was glorified in 2003 by the Serbian Orthodox Church, and his referred, in fact, in Serbia as Serbia's new Chrysostom. So, Saint Nikolai Velimirovich, or Saint Nikolai of Žiče. The next saint is the first martyr among the Aleut people, Saint Peter the Aleut. Now, we are going back again, the time of the early Alaskan mission. Of course, the Orthodox missionary came from Russia, being transported and under the kind of auspices of the Russian American company, that of course primarily dealt with buying or furs. So furs was a commodity they were interested in primarily, and so there were hunting parties with Aleut guides going down every which way. So, and Peter, who was already converted and baptized as an Orthodox Christian, was one of the guides. Now, at that time, California was in Spanish hands, and the hunting party went too far south into these lands and were apprehended by the Spaniards. And of course the Russians were immediately placed in the hotel because the Spanish did not want to upset the powerful Tsar. But the Aleut was left sort of more or less on his own, and was captured by the Jesuit priests, and they interrogated him and tried to convert him to Roman Catholic Church, which he refused. He said that I'm a Christian already, I'm an Orthodox Christian. So, and they tortured him to death. They started cutting off the digits of his toes and fingers, and he bled to death, still holding steadfast to his Orthodox faith. So now he's portrayed as a child very often, a small figure, but in fact, chances are, of course, that was not the case. I mean, he might have been small of stature, but I think that to be a guide for a hunting party, I think he was an accomplished tracker and hunter himself. So the next one, we have to hurry. We have many saints. So the next one is Saint Raphael of Brooklyn. Russian Orthodox mission in the United States was the first and strongest, and somehow was never really there to promote Russian orthodoxy. Rather, they tried very hard to accommodate and be a church for all Orthodox immigrants, and especially at the very end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the great influx of immigrants pouring into this country. There were people from all over the place. There were Greeks and people from Eastern Europe. And of course, they went to the Orthodox Church that was already there, and very often it was an Orthodox Church belonging to the Russian mission. So, and so Saint Raphael was, in fact, born Rafia Hawawini in Beirut, in Lebanon. He was a Syrian, from a Syrian refugee in Lebanon. And he studied in Damascus, and then in the School of Orthodox Theology in Halki in Turkey, and then finally in Theological Academy in Russia, in Kiev. So, and in 1904 he became the first Orthodox bishop to be consecrated in North America. Consecration was done by then Archbishop Tikhon of Moscow, later Saint Tikhon, and Bishop Innocent of New York City, and he served as a bishop in Brooklyn, New York, until his death. So he served this influx of Orthodox, Arabic Orthodox, or Antiochian Orthodox, as they became known later on, way before the Antiochian Church began to form as a jurisdiction in this country. So he was absolutely amazing. He built or assisted in building 30 churches throughout the United States from 1895 to 1914. It was in the Northeast and in Ohio, in West Virginia, everywhere. So here you see his grave. Right now it looks different because they the lower part of that tombstone right now has a mosaic image of the icon of Saint Raphael. Now, the next image that we see is of the first Syro-Arabian bishop in America, in the Syro-Arabian Cathedral of St. Nicholas in Brooklyn, as it was known. This is the funeral of St. Raphael. So you can see a number of clergy and laity surrounding him. So it's an old photograph. Next saint is, although been glorified recently as within a number of new martyrs of Russia. His icon has not been painted yet. So Saint Seraphim of Sitka and Uglich, missionary of Alaska and hieromartyr under the Soviets. So you see the photograph of him as a bishop. And then the photograph in the center is his prison photograph. You know, the front and profile. And this is his photograph before his death. Again, he was executed during the horrible year of 1937. All right, and then we come to one of the greatest saints, is Saint Tikhon of Moscow, or Saint Tikhon of America. Saint Tikhon was the first patriarch elected by the Russian Orthodox Church after centuries of the church being beheaded and led by the synod and the government. Unfortunately, that election took place in 1917 during the revolution, when they were shooting on the streets. Now, Saint Tikhon was the bishop in America. Um, I'm always confusing this term, the times. Okay, right here. He returned to Russia in 1907. He went to America in 1897. So for 10 years he served the church in America. He was the one who initiated the translation of the church services into English. He commissioned that first translation from Isabel Hapgood, a nice Anglican lady. He was the one who established the monastery as Saint Tikhon Monastery in Pennsylvania. He truly was a visionary who saw and expressed the fact that the Orthodox Church in America is not just to be there to serve the immigrants or visitors. It should not remain ethnic, but it should be a missionary church for all Americans. He left this legacy that we actually are still holding on to. Now, I'm running out of time, so I have to skip to the next one. And the next, actually, this is the icon, a modern icon of the new martyrs of Russia. In this icon, there is one fragment that I would like you to look at. The fragment that has something to do with this ancient monastery in the northeast of Russia called the Solovetsky Monastery. That was one of the largest and most wonderful monastic centers before the revolution, and after the revolution in the 20s it became a death camp primarily for the clergy and those people who were arrested because they belonged to the church, and for their faith. So this is the photograph of the main part of the monastery. And the next one, you see that fragment from the icon, which shows the little island and the firing squad. And it also shows this ladder leading up into the hill upon which there is the church, or a chapel. And that chapel became a torture chamber during the time the Solovetsky Monastery was turned into a camp, a death camp. And they didn't have those steps. In fact, that the stairway was actually a log chute. And the prisoners who could no longer work were simply tied to a log and sent down through the chute. And within the church, they stayed packed, in 2 layers. It was a small church, but there were so many people packed in there, so they could only lay in 2 layers, one on top of the other, and then they would have to turn on command, and then they will have to shift from one layer to the other. It was a horrible torture. So, as they say, Nazis destroyed people in gas chambers, but the Soviets did not have gas, so they invented other ways of destroying people. So, our next saint a martyr, again a holy confessor, Varnava. Uh, uh, so he um, was born in the in the Serbian family in Gary, Indiana, and stayed stayed in America, grew up in America, and when he was still a child, his parents returned to Serbia, and he uh, uh, graduated from a theological academy in Belgrade in 1937, before the war, and so he became a monk, and then was subsequently became a bishop. He died for his faith under the communists in Serbia in 1964. All right. And the last, the number 17th in our list, is a priest, Father Saint Anatol Kamensky. Again, there's no icon, just the photographs. New hieromartyr and later Archbishop of Irkutsk. So there is a wonderful post by Father Andrei Morby about him and about his martyrdom. Again, he was a missionary in and served the church in Alaska, then in Minnesota. And then he went to St. Petersburg Academy and returned, came back and returned to Russia in 1903 and was appointed director of Odessa Theological Academy. So, and he fell under the Soviets. So these are the 17 people who represent the a cross cut of all these wonderful people who worked to build up and to manifest the truth of Orthodoxy here in this land. And we truly are grateful for them, not only for their lives, but for their continuous intercession for us. This is from the Alaska State Library Historical Collection. There is a photograph of Father Anatol with the parishioners in the Sitka Cathedral, so you can see them all in their bowler hats, and the a rather distinguished gentleman in a top hat as well. So the saints have this very important and central role in the life of the church, not because of their authority, not even because of their example of the Christian way of life, but it's because they are still present. It's because of their love. It's because of their dedication and self sacrifice that they've shown during their life, and they continue to show even today. So this is an icon of American saints. You can see that there are only few of them here, but it is a composition of the church in which where the presence of God is being proclaimed and where the kingdom of God is being made visible. So now, of course, the reading for this coming Sunday, on which we remember our local American saints, is the reading from Gospel of St. Matthew about the calling of the disciples. Very very appropriate. And here, just for a few seconds, we can look at this beautiful mosaic of the calling of the two brothers, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother. They were casting the net into the sea. And our Lord calling them out and saying, "Follow me, and I will make you catchers of men." So all our saints became Christ's apostles. All of them were sent to us. All of them shared the very precious, the most precious part of their hearts with us, and that is the dwelling place of Christ Himself. So next week we will go back to dealing and looking at these two, or rather overlapping seasons of the church, the saints that in the feast that we will be celebrating next week, and the readings of the church, the gospel and epistle, and the Sunday that will be the third Sunday after Pentecost. Sorry for it took me so long. We have a multitude of saints that we need to meet, and we need to pray to and ask for their intercessions. So I'll see you again next week on Tuesday. Good night.